All right, so this video is going to be about a tip to think about and strategy to think about when you're making your lineups. So I play in general manager mode, and I have a manager who manages the in-game stuff, except I retain control over lineups and rotations and bullpens. So if you're in that situation or you're a manager, this tip might be helpful for you in thinking through building a lineup. So what we're going to talk about here is batting splits. And what we're talking about, splits can be any number of things in baseball. We're talking about splits with versus left-handed and versus right-handed pitching and how guys do versus lefty compared to how they do versus righties. One way the game gives you a quick overview of this is in your team info page. It's how your team does versus left-handed starting pitching and versus right-handed starting pitching, and it gives you your win-loss record versus each. I would not recommend using this for a gauge of how good your team is versus lefties and righties, because weird things can happen in small sample sizes. You know, in 27 and 21, so that's what, 48 games. Weird things can happen in 48 games where my team might be much better than this actually versus lefties or much worse. So you kind of want to think about how are they going to perform in the future, not how they have performed just based off of win-loss records. And one way to check this is you can go to statistics, and we're going to go to team statistics. And so here are all the team stats, right? And here are my Orioles, and you can go to splits and can look how were they this last season in 2025 versus righties. So the best stat of these here to gauge, in my opinion, is OPS, and that's on base plus slugging. And you can see the Orioles had an 808 OPS, which was the best in the league. Only one other team was over 800. The Phillies were at 804. The league average, as you can see here, 745. So my team was awesome against righties. And then we can see how they were versus lefties, a 736 OPS plus. So a good bit lower. The league average is 733. So went from being best in the league to being just about league average. So you're going to want to drill down on that. Where are the issues and what can you do to address it? So here's my lineup. This is just the lineup versus righties. And let's go ahead and get this back to normal here. So I'm going to sort by weighted runs created plus, which I think is the best catch-all individual player hitting statistic. You might prefer other things, OPS plus, whatever, slugging percentage, whatever you want to use. But I recommend weighted runs created plus. So we're going to sort by that and then look at the splits. So we're going to sort and see how my team did versus right-handed pitching. As you can see, a lot of guys did really well, right? So 100 here is league average. So all but 3 players were above league average versus righties for me. If we go to versus left-handed, it's a much different story. You've got my starting second baseman, Drew Bowser, was a 67. Runs created plus. Adley Rutschman was a 79. My starting catcher, Nick Matan, Jason Rosario, all these guys are starters for me. So I would also recommend, still drilling down further than this, because again, weird things can happen in small sample sizes. Nick Matan, 85 runs created plus against lefties last season, but it was only 96 plate appearances. Weird stuff can happen to where maybe he's actually better than that. So if you find a guy who you want to check out his splits, look at more than one season. So you can go up here, you can go to batting stats, and I'll go back to, this is the default here. So we're on regular season, but then we can go to how is he in his career versus lefties. And as you can see, he's had 582 plate appearances against lefties over his 4 seasons, and he's got an 85 runs created plus, which, funny enough, is exactly what he was last season. So this just kind of seems to be who he is. He's a below average bat. He had one good season against lefties, and then an atrocious one, pretty bad one, and a not great one. So, but versus righties, he crushes it. He's a 121 runs created plus in 1,800 plate appearances. So, if you can have him just play versus righties, he's an all-star level player. He's not going to be enough plate appearances just, against righties to qualify for a lot of things if he's only playing against righties, but he'll still get a lot of playing time. And then what you can do is you can find a third baseman. Matan's my third baseman. You can find a third baseman who hits lefties really well, and that way you have Matan in there versus righties and some other dude in there against lefties, and your team's gonna be better balanced. Now, you don't have enough roster spots to platoon everybody. That's what it's called. I know some people who watch the videos are just getting into baseball and just getting into the game. So platoon means if Matan is playing third base against righties and somebody else is playing third base against lefties, they're platooning third base. So you don't have enough roster spots to platoon every position. But if you have maybe 3 guys who you want to platoon, that'll make your lineup a lot stronger. So a way you can do that is you can just go here, and by do that I mean find guys to bring in to platoon, because you might have guys in your organization, right? Check AA, check AAA, check your bench players. Say like, do I have any third basemen here who can play versus lefties against Nick Matan instead of Nick Matan? And if the answer is no, what I would do is go here to the league statistics. You're going to want to go to sortable stats. And let me just make sure everything is back to the default here so I can show you how I go through this. So now you're in batting stats. This is the last season's batting stats. And I made a filter here that a guy has to have 100 at-bats or plate appearances. I think it says at-bats here, but I think it's actually plate appearances. Doesn't matter. So a guy who has 100 at-bats, and then I'm going to go to splits and say versus lefties. So now what I'm looking at here is every player last season who had at least 100 at-bats versus left-handed pitching, okay? And I can sort by the position that I want, right? Again, I was saying, Nick Matan was a third baseman. And what you can do is here, you can try to find undervalued players who might not be superstars, but if you play them in the right role, maybe just versus lefties, they're going to be a really good player. I mean, the Tampa Bay Rays do this all the time in real life. It's one of the reasons they're so good is they put all their players in the best position to succeed. And they don't have, the superstar name brand talent of a lot of teams, but they are such a versatile team because they do things like this. They play guys who are really good against righties, and if they're bad against lefties, they have somebody else there. So, you can just go through these third basemen, or just to go back to everybody, looking through here, like, this guy, Tim Tawa. Who is this? He's a 26-year-old outfielder. Again, he hasn't put up big numbers. He's never put up more than 1.1 WAR. So would this be a guy who, does he actually hit lefties and righties well here? Or is this just a small sample thing? Because last year he had 163 runs created plus against lefties and 100 at-bats. His career, not nearly as good, only an 84. He's had 2 atrocious seasons and 2 awesome ones against lefties. So maybe a guy worth thinking about bringing in as depth for a platoon outfield bat. Versus righties, wow, that's crazy. He's like opposite. He's really bad in the 2 seasons he's good against lefties and okay in the seasons. Yeah, so he's had 2 different split seasons. It's weird. He's not consistent versus lefties and righties. So that's a way that you can kind of go through the league and find undervalued players. I bet it doesn't cost as much to get for this guy. I mean, he's a 4th or 5th outfielder. He still has option years left, so you could always just put him in the minors as backup, because I need more right-handed hitting players in my system. So he might be a guy that I go after to say, okay, you're going to be in the minors and you can come up in platoon in an injury, or, if I lose a guy to free agency in a year, I've got this guy in my system come up and play against lefties. But, he's has a very uneven track record, so I might not do it with him. But again, just, sort by whatever stat you want, and then go in, look at the splits versus left versus right, figure out where your holes are, and find a couple guys who you want to put into platoons so you'll maximize the talent on your roster better. That's all for this video.